Picture a Spanish colonial mansion rising from Death Valley's scorching sand. 32,000 square feet of marble, hand-wrought iron, and custom furniture in America's hottest, driest place on Earth. Construction cost between $1.5 and $2.5 million in 1920s dollars. That's $25 to $42 million in today's money. A fortune spent in the middle of nowhere. And here's what no one's talking about. The man whose name is on the castle never owned it, never paid a single dollar for it. And the man who actually built it? He was bankrolled by a con artist who convinced him to invest in a gold mine that never existed. Death Valley Scotty swindled Chicago millionaire Albert Johnson out of thousands. Johnson discovered the fraud, and then he built Scotty a castle anyway. This is the story of the strangest partnership in American history. A friendship built on lies that somehow produced one of the most iconic mansions in the American West. A monument to deception that still stands today, incomplete in the middle of Death Valley. If you're ready to see what really happened when a con man met a millionaire in the desert, let's begin. Walter Edward Perry Scott was born in Kentucky in 1872. Horse farm family, harness racing circuit. At age 11, he ran away to Nevada to join his brothers at a ranch near Wells. He learned to ride. He learned to work. He learned something else too, how to tell a story. By age 16, Scotty had joined Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show as a stunt rider. For the next 12 years, from 1888 to 1900, he toured America and Europe. Crowds, attention, applause. He learned the art of publicity from the master showman himself. But here's the kicker. When Scotty left Buffalo Bill's show in 1900, he didn't just leave entertainment. He left with a skill more valuable than horsemanship. He'd learned how to sell a fantasy. In 1902, unable to rejoin the Wild West show, Scotty pivoted to a new profession, gold prospecting, or rather, pretending to be a gold prospector. He convinced a wealthy New York businessman to grubstake his fictitious Death Valley gold mine. The con was elegant in its simplicity. The investor sent money. Scotty sent letters describing his lucrative strikes. For 2 years, he faithfully wrote his patron. The mine was producing, gold was being extracted, shipments were coming soon. Wait a minute. How much money are we talking about? Over $5,000. That's $180,000 in today's dollars from a single investor. For a mine that didn't exist. In 1904, Scotty boarded a train heading east with a bag supposedly containing $12,000 in gold dust. That's $430,000 in modern money. Before he reached Philadelphia, the bag was mysteriously stolen. The newspapers went wild. Who was this desert prospector with a fortune in stolen gold? The publicity was exactly what Scotty wanted. And then he did something audacious. In July 1905, Walter Scott announced he would break the cross-country train speed record from Los Angeles to Chicago. He contracted with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway for $5,500, about $197,000 today, to provide a special train. 3 cars. Engine, baggage car, sleeper, and dining car. July 9th, 1905. The Coyote Special departed Los Angeles. 44 hours and 54 minutes later, it rolled into Chicago's Dearborn Street Station. A new record. 2,265 miles. Crowds met him at every city along the route. National headlines. "We got there so fast that nobody had time to sober up," Scotty later said. At one hotel register along the route, he signed, "Scott, Death Valley." The name stuck. Death Valley Scotty was born. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was waiting at that Chicago train station. In the crowd at Dearborn Street Station stood Albert Mussey Johnson, treasurer of the National Life Insurance Company of Chicago, son of a wealthy Ohio financier industrialist, born the same year as Scotty, 1872, but from a completely different world. Johnson had already given Scotty small grubstakes, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. Now, after this spectacular publicity stunt, Johnson wanted in deeper. Johnson's annual salary as president of National Life Insurance, approximately $1 million. That's $32 million per year in today's dollars. The man had serious money. And Scotty had his attention. Here's what no one expected. These two men were about to form one of the strangest partnerships in American history. Between 1904 and 1906, Albert Johnson and his partner Edward A. Shedd poured more than $4,000 into Scotty's operation. That's $143,000 in today's money. Still no gold, still no mine. Johnson finally decided enough was enough. In early 1906, Johnson himself went to Death Valley. He would see this mine with his own eyes. Scotty panicked. He'd never shown anyone the mine because the mine didn't exist. So he did what any good con man would do. He staged a gunfight. The Battle of Wingate Pass happened in February 1906. Scotty led Johnson and a group of investors, including Boston mining engineer Daniel E. Owen, into Death Valley. Days into the journey, shots rang out. An ex-deputy sheriff from Goldfield, Nevada, came riding into camp claiming he'd been ambushed. His pack train had been stampeded. Scotty assured everyone he could fight off outlaws. The group continued the next day. When they reached the site of the reported shooting, Scotty fired his rifle. The mules pulling the lead wagon startled. Mining engineer Daniel Owen fell backward. Then a shot from behind stone breastworks hit Scotty's brother Warner in the groin. Scotty suddenly galloped toward the ambushers, yelling at them to stop shooting. Warner was wounded. The expedition turned back. Daniel Owen had plenty of doubts about the authenticity of this attack. But here's the problem. Johnson didn't give up. He came back to Death Valley in the winter of 1909, spent almost a month with Scotty, saw no gold mine, enjoyed the climate. His health, he'd suffered a severe back injury in a railroad accident, improved dramatically in the dry desert air. By 1912, the truth was finally public. Scotty bragged that he had sold his mine for $1 million. His creditors sued. In the lawsuit, Scotty confessed to a grand jury. My hole in Death Valley is all a myth. The con was exposed. Scotty had been lying for years. He'd stolen ore from other mines and fenced it. He'd spent years bilking investors. The gold mine never existed. And here's where the story gets strange. Albert Johnson didn't sever ties. He didn't demand his money back. He didn't sue. Instead, he kept visiting Scotty in Death Valley. In fact, Johnson paid Scotty $30 per month subsistence, about $1,070 in today's dollars, just to keep him afloat. Wait a minute. Why would a millionaire businessman continue supporting a con man who'd stolen from him? The answer isn't rational. It's emotional. Johnson was fascinated by Scotty, the charisma, the storytelling, the complete shamelessness. Johnson, religious, disciplined, successful, found something in this desert rat that he couldn't find in Chicago's boardrooms: adventure, freedom, the myth of the American West. By 1915, Johnson had purchased the Steininger Ranch in Grapevine Canyon. By 1922, he had decided to build something substantial there. His wife, Bessie, had been accompanying him on desert expeditions. She was tired of canvas tents filled with scorpions and rattlesnakes. She wanted something more comfortable for their winter vacations. Johnson hired Martin de Dubovier as architect, Matt Roy Thompson as engineer and head of construction, Charles Alexander McNeilage as designer. Construction began in 1922. And here's the real kicker. Scotty immediately began telling everyone he was building a $2 million castle with profits from his gold mine. The same gold mine everyone knew didn't exist, the same mine he'd confessed was all a myth under oath. Johnson didn't contradict him. In fact, when reporters asked, Johnson said he was Scotty's banker. He played along with the con. Why? Let me show you the scale of this operation. Almost all building materials, lumber, cement, iron, tile, were shipped by train to Bonnie Claire, Nevada, a railroad siding 20 miles northeast of the construction site. From there, the ranch's trucks hauled everything over poor dirt roads. All construction work was done manually with hand tools. Scotty's mules pulled a Fresno scraper for excavation and grading work. The main building rose from the desert floor. Spanish colonial revival architecture, hand-wrought iron, custom furniture, a water fountain in the Great Hall where water dripped down a rock face for evaporative cooling. A 1930s solar water heater, much larger than modern ones, a massive pipe organ, an unfinished swimming pool, turrets, towers, a clock tower with 25 carillon chimes set to play on the quarter hour, 32,000 square feet of living space in Death Valley, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The dry desert climate was perfect for Johnson's back injury. He and Bessie spent winters there, escaping Chicago's cold and their busy business lives. The construction continued through the Roaring '20s. By 1927, significant work had been completed. But that wasn't the real problem. In 1931, after years of construction, a devastating discovery was made. The initial survey had been wrong. The Johnsons were building their castle on federal government land. Their actual property was farther up Grapevine Canyon. Everything had to stop while they resolved this mistake. And then came 1929. October 1929. The stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. Albert Johnson's National Life Insurance Company, the source of his fortune, went into bankruptcy in 1933. Johnson had lost a considerable amount of money. The man who'd been making $1 million per year, $32 million in today's dollars, suddenly couldn't finish his desert castle. Here's what the numbers looked like. Construction had already cost between $1.5 and $2.5 million. That's $25 to $42 million in modern dollars for a winter vacation home in Death Valley. That was sitting on the wrong piece of land. Most wealthy men would have walked away, cut their losses, moved on. Johnson didn't do that. Instead, on Scotty's suggestion, the Johnsons began letting out rooms at the unfinished Death Valley Ranch, turning it into income property, a hotel in the desert, and tourists came, thousands of them, not to see Albert Johnson's winter retreat, but to see Death Valley Scotty's castle. The con had come full circle. Scotty's lies had created such a legend that people traveled across Death Valley's brutal landscape just to glimpse the supposed home of a cowboy millionaire. The swimming pool remained untiled. The gardens were never landscaped. The tiles for the pool sat in storage, but the tourists didn't care. They wanted to see Scotty's castle. By 1934, informal tours were being conducted. By 1936, professional tour guides were hired and trained. Admission price, $1 per person. Bessie Johnson administered these tours herself. She'd even written a small anthology of stories about Walter Scott in 1932, entitled Death Valley Scotty by Mabel. Hollywood movie stars visited. Reporters came from around the country. Everyone wanted to see the mystery man who'd built a fortune from a secret Death Valley gold mine. Johnson, still playing along, stayed quietly in the background. Scotty entertained dinner guests with his stories. The legend grew. Wait a minute, how much money was coming in from these tours? By the mid-1930s, visitors ranged from a few per day to as many as 130. At $1 per person, that's $22 in today's dollars, the unfinished castle was generating real income. Johnson also began selling mementos to augment tour admission charges. But here's the part no one's talking about. Johnson couldn't legally complete construction even if he'd had the money. In 1930, President Hoover had created the Death Valley National Monument, encompassing the land Johnson was building on but didn't yet own. The land surveying error still hadn't been resolved. When it finally was fixed in 1935, Johnson's insurance company had already gone bankrupt 2 years earlier. The castle would remain forever unfinished. In 1937, Walter Scott's wife, Josephine, he called her Jack, brought him to court. They'd been married since 1900, but had lived separately for most of their marriage. She'd borne a child, Walter Perry Scott, in 1914. Scotty rarely supported them. She demanded $1,000 per month, that's $21,000 in today's dollars, and a share of whatever interests Scott held in the castle and the gold mine she still believed he had. The lawsuit failed. Scotty didn't have any legal interests in the castle. He certainly didn't have $1,000 per month to give her. He had nothing. Jack then sued Albert Johnson directly. She accused him of manipulating her husband and hiding his finances to thwart her. But Johnson had no legal obligation to pay Jack anything. The lawsuit failed again. Yet Johnson took pity on her. He had already been paying Jack monthly sums between $100 and $150, $2,100 to $3,200 in today's money, to help support her and their son. He'd even purchased a house in Reno, Nevada for them in 1930. He'd paid for Walter Perry to attend military academy. After the lawsuit, Johnson raised the monthly amount to $75, about $1,580 today, which was all he could afford after the Depression. So let me get this straight. Johnson was still supporting the wife and child of the man who'd conned him, a man who had no legal or moral claim on Johnson's wealth, a man who'd confessed under oath that his mine was all a myth. Why? Towards the end of the Great Depression, the Johnsons retired to Hollywood, California. Johnson bought a marble mansion on the shore of Lake Michigan for $600,000, about $9 million in today's dollars. They visited the castle from time to time. It had become a popular tourist attraction. Approximately 100,000 people toured the villa each year. The Johnsons' original furnishings remained. Their clothing hung in closets. Park rangers began dressing in 1930s-style clothing to help take visitors on trips back in time. The unfinished swimming pool became part of the attraction, the untiled surfaces, the incomplete gardens, evidence of dreams that the Depression had killed. In 1946, Johnson established the Gospel Foundation, a charity organized to manage his estate and undertake social betterment functions. He was deeply religious, a strict fundamentalist. He didn't drink, smoke, play cards, or attend the theater. The foundation was his way of ensuring his wealth would do good after his death. In 1947, Johnson inserted a provision in his will. All his land holdings would fall to the Gospel Foundation once he died. The Death Valley Ranch, the Shadelands Ranch, the Hollywood home. One more provision stood out. Walter Scott would be taken care of by the Gospel Foundation after Johnson's passing and allowed to stay at the ranch until his death. January 7, 1948. Albert Johnson died at age 76. His castle remained forever unfinished. His insurance company had gone bankrupt, but he'd provided for his friend, the con man who'd started it all, until the end. Walter Scott lived at the castle until January 5, 1954. He died at age 82 on his way to Las Vegas for medical attention. He was buried on the rocky hill northwest of the guest house at Scotty's castle, next to his dog, Windy. The con man got his castle after all, not through gold, not through mining, but through the strangest friendship in the American West. Now let's look at what nobody's talking about. Why does this story remain hidden? Why don't more people know about the real history of Scotty's castle? Here are 7 reasons. Reason 1. The legend is more valuable than the truth. Tourist destinations need compelling stories. Con man builds castle with fake gold mine profits is a better story than wealthy businessman builds winter home and supports friend who conned him. The National Park Service, which purchased the property in 1970 for $850,000, benefits from the mythology. They still call it Scotty's Castle, not Johnson's Ranch. Reason 2. Albert Johnson never corrected the record. He actively participated in the con. When reporters asked questions, he said he was Scotty's banker. He allowed Scotty to claim ownership. He never publicly challenged the gold mine story. A millionaire businessman with everything to lose chose to protect a con man's reputation. Why? Because the friendship mattered more than the truth. Reason 3. The story reveals something uncomfortable about wealth and friendship. Johnson had everything: money, success, respect, a devoted wife. Yet he was drawn to a pathological liar and con artist. He financed Scotty's lifestyle for decades. He built him a castle. He supported his estranged wife and child. What does that say about the emptiness at the heart of conventional success? Nobody wants to examine that too closely. Reason 4. The Great Depression erased the financial paper trail. Johnson's insurance company went bankrupt in 1933. Records were lost. Financial details became murky. The exact amount Johnson spent on the castle, estimates range from $1.5 to $2.5 million, was never precisely documented. In the chaos of the Depression, many wealthy men's fortunes simply vanished. Johnson's story got lost in that collapse. Reason 5. The property was built on the wrong land. This isn't a minor detail. Johnson spent years building a massive estate on federal government property he didn't own. The surveying error wasn't discovered until 1931, after most construction was complete. This is deeply embarrassing. It suggests incompetence, poor planning, a rushed project. Better to focus on the colorful Scotty than on Johnson's expensive mistake. Reason 6. The story doesn't fit modern narratives about fraud. Today, we expect fraud victims to be angry, to seek justice, to demand restitution. Johnson did none of those things. He knew he'd been conned by 1909, 21 years before the castle was even started. He knew in 1912, when Scotty confessed under oath. Yet he kept giving Scotty money. He built him a castle. He provided for him in his will. This doesn't make sense to modern audiences. It's easier to pretend Johnson never knew about the fraud. Reason 7. The ending is uncomfortable. Scotty died penniless, supported by Johnson's charity, living in a castle he didn't own, perpetuating a lie until his final breath. Johnson died having spent millions on an unfinished desert mansion for a man who'd stolen from him. Neither man got what they claimed to want, yet both men seemed satisfied with the outcome. The cognitive dissonance is too much for most people. Better to tell the simplified version: cowboy con artist tricks businessman into building a castle. Clean, simple, wrong. The truth is messier, sadder, stranger, and far more revealing about human nature. Here's what's happening today. We see the same pattern, different era, same mistakes. Athletes making $30 million per year support childhood friends who contribute nothing. Lottery winners go bankrupt supporting extended families who never worked. Tech entrepreneurs keep toxic co-founders on payroll for years after discovering their incompetence. The pattern repeats endlessly. Why? Because Johnson's mistake wasn't unique. It's universal. Success creates isolation. Wealthy people become surrounded by people who want something from them. Genuine friendship becomes nearly impossible to distinguish from calculated networking. When someone from your past shows up, someone who knew you before the money, the temptation to believe in that relationship is overwhelming. Johnson's annual salary was approximately $1 million in 1920s dollars. That's $32 million per year today. He spent between $1.5 and $2.5 million building Scotty's castle, $25 to $42 million in modern money. For a friend who'd confessed under oath to running a con, for a man who contributed nothing to Johnson's success, for someone who couldn't even support his own wife and child, professional athletes making $40 million per year support entourages of 10 to 15 people, childhood friends, cousins, former teammates, people who provide nothing but companionship and memories. By retirement, the money's gone, the friends disappear. The pattern is identical to Johnson's story, just faster. Tech founders keep incompetent co-founders on payroll, afraid to damage the friendship that started the company. They watch those co-founders make terrible decisions. They clean up the messes. They carry the dead weight. Years later, when the company fails or barely survives, they realize the truth. Loyalty to the wrong person destroyed what they built. The principle is simple. Misplaced loyalty destroys wealth. Johnson spent a fortune on Scotty. He never finished the castle. His insurance company went bankrupt. He died having given millions to a con man. And for what? A friendship based on lies. The warm feeling of being connected to someone authentic. The myth of the colorful cowboy who reminded him of freedom. This is still happening. Right now, in boardrooms and mansions and penthouse apartments across America, successful people supporting failures, wealth flowing toward manipulation and charm rather than competence and contribution. The names change. The dollar amounts increase. The core story remains the same. The Johnsons died without heirs. Albert passed in 1948. Bessie followed in 1967. The Gospel Foundation, Johnson's religious charity established in 1946, inherited the entire estate, the castle, the land, everything Johnson had built in Death Valley. In 1970, the National Park Service purchased the property from the Gospel Foundation for $850,000. That's $6.8 million in today's dollars. The government bought Johnson's unfinished dream, the castle he couldn't complete, the monument to a con man who never owned it. By 1972, Scotty's Castle was officially incorporated into Death Valley National Monument. The National Park Service began operating tours. Approximately 100,000 people visited annually. They came to see Death Valley Scotty's Castle, not Johnson's winter retreat, not the mansion of a Chicago insurance executive. Scotty's Castle. The con had outlived both men. The lie had become permanent. The Gospel Foundation, freed from property ownership, received tax-exempt status. They continue awarding grants to socially oriented causes. The foundation that managed Johnson's Desert Folly now distributes charitable funds. Johnson's religious commitment, the fundamentalist beliefs that defined his life, lives on through that foundation. But here's what nobody mentions. Johnson spent between $25 and $42 million in today's dollars building a castle. The National Park Service bought it for $6.8 million. Johnson's estate took a massive loss. The Gospel Foundation sold the property for a fraction of what Johnson had invested. The math is devastating, and the tourists kept coming. They walked through Johnson's home. They admired his furniture. They toured his unfinished pool. They listened to stories about Walter Scott's imaginary gold mine. The Rangers dressed in 1930s clothing. The Welt Theater organ played its 1,121 pipes. The experience was authentic, except for the fundamental lie at its core. Scotty never owned this place, never paid for it, never earned it, yet his name remained on every sign, every brochure, every tour guide script. October 18, 2015. Death Valley received nearly 3 inches of rain in 5 hours. The storm stalled over Grapevine Canyon. Flash flooding struck Scotty's Castle with estimated flow rates of 3,200 cubic feet per second. Park rangers watched power poles and metal dumpsters float down the canyon. Mud and debris piled up to 1 foot deep inside the visitor center. The access road was completely destroyed. Death Valley averages less than 2 inches of rain per year. A year's worth of precipitation fell in 5 hours. The same desert climate that had healed Johnson's back injury nearly destroyed the castle he'd built there. The structure itself survived largely intact, testament to the quality of Johnson's 1920s construction. But the property was closed indefinitely. The National Park Service began planning flood recovery. Repairs would take years, cost millions, all to restore a tourist attraction named after a con man. Between December 2017 and April 2018, the National Park Service offered limited flood recovery tours of the grounds. Visitors could see the damage, the mud, the destruction, the incomplete repairs. The castle that Johnson never finished was now even more incomplete. April 22, 2021. Fire broke out at Scotty's Castle, the historic garage workshop from 1922, the building used as the visitor center, burned completely. Another historic outbuilding was lost as well. Total destruction. Investigators from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection couldn't determine the cause. The fire started inside the visitor center. Why? Unknown. The main castle building was unscathed, but the rehabilitation efforts were delayed again. The reopening was pushed back to 2023, then further. As of December 2025, Scotty's Castle remains closed to the public except for specifically designated flood recovery walking tours. The castle that Johnson built, but never finished. The castle damaged by floods. The castle scarred by fire. The castle that bears the wrong man's name nearly a century after construction began. Forever incomplete. Forever frozen at the moment the Great Depression killed Johnson's fortune. Let me show you something everyone overlooks. The castle wasn't just a mansion, it was an engineering achievement that rivaled anything being built in major cities in the 1920s. The springs in Grapevine Canyon sat 300 feet higher than the villa. Johnson's engineers used this elevation difference to create water flow and pressure. That flowing water turned a Pelton wheel, a specialized turbine designed for high-head, low-flow water sources. The Pelton wheel ran a generator. The generator produced electricity for the entire compound. No external power, no utility lines. Complete self-sufficiency in Death Valley. Underground tunnels ran 1/4 mile beneath the building. Inside those tunnels, a powerhouse, thousands of unused tiles for the swimming pool, and hundreds of nickel-iron battery cells. Those batteries regulated power and provided backup when the water flow decreased. This was 1920s technology. Before the electrical grid reached rural areas, before renewable energy was a concept. Johnson also installed a 1930s solar water heater, much larger than modern versions. Evaporative cooling through the rock face fountain in the Great Hall. Advanced irrigation for the planned gardens. Every system was designed for sustainability and independence. The total construction cost, between $1.5 and $2.5 million in 1920s dollars, included all this engineering. $25 to $42 million in today's money for a self-sufficient desert compound with electricity, water management, heating, cooling, and power storage. In 1922. Most wealthy people today can't achieve that level of self-sufficiency. Johnson did it nearly a century ago, in Death Valley, without modern technology, using nothing but 1920s engineering knowledge and unlimited budget. And it's all named after a con man who contributed nothing to its design, construction, or operation. The irony is suffocating. Johnson built a marvel of engineering, a demonstration of what human ingenuity could achieve in the harshest environment, and the world remembers it as Scotty's Castle, the fake mansion of a fake millionaire with a fake gold mine. Here's another detail the tourist brochures skip. Much of the construction was done by local Timbisha Shoshone tribal members, the indigenous people who'd lived in Death Valley for thousands of years. They built Johnson's Castle. They hauled materials over poor dirt roads. They worked manually with hand tools. They excavated with Scotty's mules pulling Fresno scrapers. Johnson paid them, provided employment during the 1920s when Native Americans faced severe discrimination and limited economic opportunities. The Timbisha Shoshone helped build one of Death Valley's most iconic structures. But when tourists visit Scotty's Castle today, how many hear about the Timbisha Shoshone workers? How many tour guides mention the tribal members who actually constructed the building? The narrative focuses on Scotty, the white con man, and Johnson, the white millionaire. The indigenous laborers who built the castle disappear from the story. This pattern is everywhere in American history. Wealthy white men get credit. The actual workers, especially indigenous people and minorities, get forgotten. Scotty's Castle is no different. Johnson may have paid fair wages for the era. He may have treated the Timbisha Shoshone workers well. But their contribution isn't part of the legend. Their labor built the castle. Their knowledge of the desert may have informed construction decisions. Their skills made Johnson's vision possible. Yet the castle bears Scotty's name. The tours focus on Scotty's con. The legend celebrates a white con man and a white businessman. The Timbisha Shoshone who built it remain invisible. Now, let's look at what nobody's talking about. Why does this story remain hidden? Why don't more people know about the real history of Scotty's Castle? Here are 7 reasons. Reason 1. The legend is more valuable than the truth. Tourist destinations need compelling stories. Con man builds castle with fake gold mine profits is a better story than wealthy businessman builds winter home and supports friend who conned him. The National Park Service, which purchased the property in 1970 for $850,000, $6.8 million today, benefits from the mythology. They still call it Scotty's Castle, not Johnson's Ranch. They still center the tours around Scotty. They still perpetuate the con because the con sells tickets. Reason 2, Albert Johnson never corrected the record. He actively participated in the con. When reporters asked questions, he said he was Scotty's banker. He allowed Scotty to claim ownership. He never publicly challenged the gold mine story. A millionaire businessman with everything to lose chose to protect a con man's reputation. Why? Because the friendship mattered more than the truth. Or because Johnson was so lonely that perpetuating Scotty's lie was worth the cost. Either way, Johnson sealed the fate of his own legacy. His name is forgotten. Scotty's name endures. Reason 3. The story reveals something uncomfortable about wealth and friendship. Johnson had everything: $1 million annual salary, $32 million in today's dollars, success, respect, a devoted wife, business empire, social standing. Yet he was drawn to a pathological liar and con artist. He financed Scotty's lifestyle for 44 years. He built him a $25 to $42 million castle. He supported his estranged wife and child. He provided for him in his will. What does that say about the emptiness at the heart of conventional success? Nobody wants to examine that too closely. It's easier to laugh at the colorful con man than to ask why successful people crave authenticity so desperately they'll pay millions for a fake version. Reason 4. The Great Depression erased the financial paper trail. Johnson's National Life Insurance Company went bankrupt in 1933. Records were lost. Financial details became murky. The exact amount Johnson spent on the castle, estimates range from $1.5 to $2.5 million, was never precisely documented. How much did he give Scotty over 44 years? Unknown. How much did he pay Jack Scott and their son? Unknown. How much did he lose when his insurance company collapsed? Unknown. In the chaos of the Depression, many wealthy men's fortunes simply vanished. Johnson's story got lost in that collapse. Nobody can trace the full financial damage because the records don't exist. Reason 5. The property was built on the wrong land. This isn't a minor detail. This is catastrophic incompetence. Johnson spent years and between $1.5 and $2.5 million building a massive estate on federal government property he didn't own. The surveying error wasn't discovered until 1931, after most construction was complete. He had to stop construction, lock up the grounds, return to Chicago, spend 5 years negotiating with the government. Finally, in 1935, a law was passed allowing him to purchase the property. By then, his insurance company had already gone bankrupt. This sequence of events is deeply embarrassing. It suggests poor planning, inadequate due diligence, a rushed project. Better to focus on the colorful Scotty than on Johnson's expensive, humiliating mistake. Reason 6. The story doesn't fit modern narratives about fraud. Today, we expect fraud victims to be angry, to seek justice, to demand restitution, to pursue criminal charges. Johnson did none of those things. He knew he'd been conned by 1909, 21 years before the castle construction even started. He knew for certain in 1912, when Scotty confessed under oath that his mine was all a myth. Yet he kept giving Scotty money. He built him a castle. He supported his family. He provided for him in his will. He maintained the friendship until death. This doesn't make sense to modern audiences. It violates our expectations of how victims should behave. It's easier to pretend Johnson never knew about the fraud or to dismiss him as a fool than to accept that he knew and chose the con man anyway. Reason 7. The ending is uncomfortable. Scotty died penniless in 1954, supported entirely by Johnson's charity through the Gospel Foundation, living in a castle he didn't own, perpetuating a lie until his final breath. Johnson died in 1948, having spent millions on an unfinished desert mansion for a man who'd stolen from him. His insurance company went bankrupt. His fortune collapsed. The castle remained incomplete. Neither man got what they claimed to want. Yet both men seemed satisfied with the outcome. Johnson provided for Scotty until the end. Scotty lived at his castle and maintained the con until he died. The cognitive dissonance is too much for most people. We want victims and villains, heroes and frauds, clear moral lines. Johnson and Scotty blur all those lines. Better to tell the simplified version: cowboy con artist tricks businessman into building a castle. Clean, simple, wrong. The truth is messier, sadder, stranger, and far more revealing about human nature than any of us want to admit. Let me show you what really happened here. Strip away the romance, ignore the colorful stories, look at the cold, hard facts. Albert Johnson was making $1 million per year, $32 million in today's dollars. Walter Scott was a broke con artist who'd been publicly exposed as a fraud in 1912. Between 1904 and Johnson's death in 1948, Johnson supported Scotty for 44 years, monthly subsistence payments, a castle, support for his wife and child, provisions in his will. The castle cost between $1.5 and $2.5 million to build, $25 to $42 million today. It was never finished. The Great Depression bankrupted Johnson's insurance company in 1933. Construction stopped. The castle couldn't be completed, yet Johnson kept paying Scotty, kept supporting the lie, kept playing along with the con until he died. Scotty contributed nothing, didn't build the castle, didn't pay for it, didn't legally own it, just took credit for it. And Johnson let him, encouraged it, participated in the deception. Here's the real problem. Johnson's story reveals the central weakness of successful people. They crave authenticity. They want to believe in something real. They're so surrounded by calculation and networking and people who want something that when someone seems genuine, even if that genuineness is a calculated performance, they can't resist. Scotty was a former Wild West show performer, 12 years with Buffalo Bill Cody learning how to sell a fantasy. His entire personality was a performance. The colorful stories, the red necktie, the cowboy persona, the tales of secret gold mines. Every bit of it was designed to extract money from wealthy investors. It was an act, a show, a con. Johnson knew this by 1909, certainly by 1912 when Scotty confessed under oath that his mine was all a myth. Yet Johnson spent the next 36 years and millions of dollars supporting that performance. Why? Because Johnson needed to believe in the myth. He needed Scotty to be real. He needed the friendship to be genuine. He needed something in his life that wasn't about money or business or social obligation. It wasn't genuine. Scotty manipulated Johnson until the day Johnson died, and Johnson participated willingly in his own manipulation because the alternative, admitting he had no authentic relationships, was worse than being conned. Think about that. A man with a $32 million annual salary, a successful insurance company, a devoted wife, social standing, business respect. Everything society tells us equals happiness. And he was so lonely, so desperate for authentic human connection that he chose a con man's fake friendship over nothing. This is the hidden truth that nobody wants to face. Success doesn't solve loneliness. Money doesn't create genuine relationships. Power isolates you. And the higher you climb, the harder it becomes to find someone who wants to be around you for who you are, rather than what you can give them. Johnson couldn't solve that problem with money. He couldn't solve it with charity. He founded the Gospel Foundation. He couldn't solve it with marriage. Bessie was devoted to him. He couldn't solve it with success. He was president of a major insurance company. So he solved it by buying a fake friendship with a con man, by building a castle in Death Valley, by supporting the lie for 44 years. And here's what's truly devastating. It worked. Johnson seemed satisfied with the arrangement. He provided for Scotty until the end. He never publicly admitted being conned. He died having spent a fortune on a friendship he knew was fake, and he appeared content with that choice. What does that tell you about the real cost of success? What does it reveal about isolation at the top? What does it say about human need for connection? The lesson is simple. Nobody learns it. Display destroys wealth, but so does desperate loneliness. Johnson could have spent his millions on anything: real estate that appreciated, stocks that grew, bonds that provided steady income, more businesses that generated profit. Instead, he spent it building a castle in Death Valley for a con man who reminded him of freedom. The tragedy isn't that Johnson was conned. The tragedy is that Johnson knew he was being conned and chose it anyway, because fake friendship felt better than no friendship. This lesson repeats throughout history. Howard Hughes, billionaire aviation pioneer, died alone in a hotel room surrounded by employees, not friends. J. Paul Getty, oil tycoon worth $6 billion inflation adjusted, refused to pay his grandson's ransom and died estranged from his family. Cornelius Vanderbilt, richest man in America, died surrounded by family who hated him and were fighting over his inheritance. Success isolates. Wealth creates distance. Power breeds suspicion. Everyone wants something from you. Every relationship becomes transactional. Every friendship carries hidden agendas. The higher you climb, the fewer people you can trust. Johnson found a solution. Pay for a fake friend. Support the con, maintain the illusion. It cost him $200 to $400 million in today's dollars. His insurance company collapsed. His castle remained unfinished. His name was forgotten while the conmans endured. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had Scotty, the colorful cowboy, the desert rat, the man who told outrageous lies and made Johnson laugh, the friend who reminded him of adventure and freedom and the American West, even if it was all fake. Even if Scotty was manipulating him, even if the entire friendship was a performance designed to extract money. At least he wasn't alone. That's the lesson. That's the truth nobody wants to face. Successful people don't lose their fortunes to obvious scams. They lose them to relationships they desperately want to be real. They lose them to loneliness. They lose them to the unbearable isolation that comes with having everything except genuine human connection. Johnson died in 1948. Scotty lived at the castle until 1954. The Gospel Foundation sold the property to the National Park Service in 1970. Today, approximately 100,000 people visit annually when it's not closed for flood damage or fire repairs. They tour Johnson's home. They admire his engineering. They listen to stories about Scotty's gold mine. The con never ended. It just changed audiences. Display destroys wealth, but desperate connection to the wrong people destroys it faster. Loneliness destroys it fastest of all. Albert Johnson spent between $200 and $400 million in today's dollars over 44 years supporting a friendship he knew was fake. His insurance company went bankrupt. His castle remained forever unfinished. His name was forgotten. And Scotty, the con man who started it all, lived in that castle, perpetuating the lie until he died, buried on the hill overlooking a property he never owned. Gone, wasted, destroyed. $25 to $42 million in construction costs, $32 million annual salary loss to bankruptcy, 44 years of monthly support payments, over $1 million supporting a con man's wife and child, millions more in land purchases, legal fees, ongoing maintenance, $160 to $320 million in lost insurance company equity, $18 to $35 million loss when the property sold for a fraction of construction costs. The total damage is staggering. Between $200 and $400 million in modern dollars, all for a fake friendship, all for the illusion of authentic human connection. And nobody's talking about this because it reveals something too uncomfortable about human nature. Successful people aren't destroyed by obvious frauds. They're destroyed by relationships they desperately want to be real. Johnson didn't lose his fortune because he was stupid. He lost it because he was lonely. Because Scotty represented something Johnson couldn't find in Chicago's boardrooms or social clubs or even in his own marriage: freedom, adventure, authenticity. Even though that authenticity was completely fake, the pattern repeats today. Athletes bankrupt from carrying entourages, tech founders destroyed by toxic partnerships, lottery winners broke from supporting extended families. The story changes, the amounts increase, the core mistake remains identical. Successful people desperately trying to buy genuine friendship, lonely people paying millions for fake authenticity, isolated people choosing con artists over admitting they have no one. Scotty's castle still stands in Death Valley, damaged by floods in 2015, scarred by fire in 2021, forever unfinished, forever bearing the wrong man's name, closed to most visitors, a monument to the strangest friendship in American history. A testament to the real cost of success, a warning about what loneliness can cost you. 32,000 square feet of Spanish colonial architecture rising from the desert floor, hand-wrought iron, custom furniture, a 1,121-pipe Welt theater organ, underground tunnels with thousands of unused tiles, a self-sustaining power system ahead of its time, a solar water heater from the 1930s, engineering marvels built in the middle of nowhere. By a millionaire for a con man, named after a lie, incomplete forever. That's the story of Scotty's castle, the con man who never owned it, the millionaire who couldn't finish it, the 44-year friendship built on fraud, the hundreds of millions of dollars spent buying fake authenticity, the loneliness at the heart of conventional success, and the truth that nobody wants to discuss. Sometimes being conned feels better than being alone. Johnson chose the con. He knew what he was doing. He did it anyway. And he died apparently satisfied with that choice. What does that tell you about the real cost of success? What does it reveal about wealth and isolation? What does it say about the desperate human need for connection? Nobody's talking about it. The National Park Service still calls it Scotty's Castle. The tours still focus on the con man's gold mine. The rangers still dress in 1930s clothing. The tourists still come to see Death Valley Scotty's mansion. Johnson's name appears in fine print. His sacrifice is forgotten. His engineering achievements are overlooked. His desperate loneliness is invisible. But the castle stands, incomplete, damaged, forever bearing a con man's name, a perfect monument to what happens when successful people try to buy something money can't purchase: genuine human connection.